Hello and happy Monday. All right, for this Monday, we've got some questions from some younger leaders, some new leaders. All right, so let me get on my phone. The questions are on my phone. And let me look at the first question. All right, here it is. This question comes from Kylie, and Kylie writes, how do I earn, sorry, not learn, how do I earn trust and credibility quickly with people who might be older and may have more experience than me? Kylie, this is a really great question, and I think a lot of new leaders have when they're just going into a position and they might be managing people that are older than they are. First thing is acknowledge the fact that you have some inexperience. It's okay to acknowledge that and to not try to hide that. When I say acknowledge it, I don't mean walk around going, I'm inexperienced, I'm inexperienced. What I'm saying is don't pretend to have experience you don't have. That's what I mean by acknowledge that. And when you're meeting with everyone, and I would suggest meet individually with everyone. And that first meeting that you have with your team, I would like you to honor their experience. So ask them questions about their experience. Ask them about their longevity in the organization. Ask them about what it is that they're passionate about and what are the things that they bring to the table. And then it's in that conversation, you can also talk about some of the things that you bring to the table. I think we forget that when we're new leaders and we're in this position, we're in those positions because we have some skills. We do bring some things to the table. So I want you to honor the things you bring to the table. And then also, here's where vulnerability kicks in by being honest and saying, ultimately, my goal is to make sure that our team trust each other, respect each other, and work together well. And I know I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. That's what you guys are. You guys are the team, and my expectation is for you guys to be the smartest person in the room, so to speak, the smartest people in the room. And that's the whole point of leadership. Whether you are 25 or 55, the goal is not for you as the leader to be the smartest person in the room. The goal is for you to curate the smartest people together, help them form a team that will be able to execute on the vision. That's the goal. And so it is not only okay to own that you may not have experience with something, it is also important to recognize and honor the experience that's in the room. And that's what those individual meetings are all about, to provide an opportunity for those individual experiences. Kylie, I hope that helps in terms of you being able to understand that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and you earn more credibility by owning that, by being honest about that. But even as a leader, not being the smartest person in the room, you are still bringing a skill set. And so you also want to honor your own skill set. So it's a cross of having some humility with also having some pride in what you bring to the table. Okay, so let's pull another question. So this question is from Dave. And Dave says, hey, Marie, love the show. Thanks, Dave. How do I balance being approachable with setting clear boundaries? Oh, I love the boundary question. So first off, approachability does not mean that you cannot set boundaries. It's actually more important when you are approachable to also set those boundaries. And it's setting them up front, letting people know what are the rules of engagement of working on the team, what is acceptable and not acceptable, and sticking to it. So for example, I can be empathetic and flexible if someone has an emergency and needs to leave and they may not have the time. right? Like they may be new and the company's policy is that there's 90 days and they can't take a vacation day, but they have an emergency. So I can sit down with them and say, look, I understand you have an emergency. The company's policy is X. I have to honor the company's policy, but I'm willing to work with you. So let's talk about, once you've gone through this emergency, let's sit down and figure out a way so that we're still honoring the company's policy, but we're also helping you, right? So I'm not going to penalize you for taking this time off, but I may not be able to pay you for taking this time off because of the company's policy of the not being able to use sick days the first 90 days, but I understand that you need it, but you won't be penalized for it. It won't be held against you. That's important for people to know, that you're not going to hold this against them because they had a family emergency, and that you're empathetic enough to recognize that there is a family emergency. Now, what I would suggest doing is that before those type of emergencies happening, sit down with your HR team and talk about the fact that, look, life happens. How can we as employers make sure that we can help and support people when they have an emergency? Is there a way that this policy can be waived if they bring in medical proof? Or is there a way that we can, say that they can make up the time? What are the things that we can do as an organization? Because we've set this rule, but I also don't want to violate the rule, but I also want to make sure that my team understands that I do care about them, and I do want to honor the fact that life happens, right? So having those conversations with your HR department beforehand, being honest with your team when you cannot bend something, when it is the policy, but you recognize that they need what their needs are, that you're not going to penalize them for this. This is not going to be something we're going to bring up in a performance review, as an example, that it is what it is, right? Like they had an emergency, they had to leave. I get it. There's no penalty, except I won't be able to pay you for that time off. And I think that's important for people to recognize that they're not going to be penalized, but you're also towing the line. You're also saying that this is the rule. I'm not going to bend the rule, but I'm also not going to break you for the rule. I hope that's helpful in a simple example. But the point is that you set boundaries and you stick to them. You adhere to those boundaries, but you also have compassion and understanding, right? The other thing when we talk about approachability is a lot of times people feel like, well, people keep coming to my office and they're chit-chatting with me and I can't get my work done. And so what's important is to be able to say, I've really enjoyed this conversation, but I have work to do and so do you. So let's get to work. And, if you want to continue the chat, why don't we do that over lunch? Or why don't we do that on our next break, right? If you don't want to have lunch with them. But you need to be firm in the sense of saying, I've got work to do, you've got work to do. When it comes to people coming in and out of your office or your cube trying to chit chat. And if you're walking around and you happen to see someone that's constantly away from their desk, a very gentle and simple way of saying, hey, get back to work, without calling them out and embarrassing them in front of their coworkers, is asking them about a project. If you know what they're working on because you've constantly been in conversations with them, it's as simple as saying, hey, Janice, are you done with XYZ project? I'd like to talk about the progress of that. And if they say, oh, I'm done. Oh, great. Do you have a minute for us to go talk about it? Now you're pulling them away from that conversation. You're not calling them out in front of their coworkers. You're pulling them away. You're going into the office and you're discussing the project. It's not a bait and switch moment where you bring them in and you don't talk about the project. You talk about the fact that Janice has been chit-chatting with Sarah for an hour. No. You pull them in and you say, okay, let's discuss the project. Tell me where you're at, what's going on. You have a real conversation about that. And then after you've had the conversation, and if it's true, Janice has completed that project, that's where you can say, well, it seems to me that you've got some time. How about if I give you another project? Or what are some other things that are on your plate right now that you need to work on? So kind of emphasizing that there's other work that can be done as opposed to just chit-chatting with her colleague who may be trying to work on a project. And again, it is a more gentle way of not calling someone out, but what one of my colleagues loves to say, which I love this, which is calling people in. And that's the term that he uses all the time. And I love that. So we're calling them in, right? As opposed to calling them out. Now, that's a couple of tips in terms of when we talk about you want to be approachable and you want people to be comfortable coming to you, but you also want to set the boundary. A funny thing is also in terms of setting boundaries and people knowing is that people watch you as a leader and they get accustomed to your habits. And sometimes you can set boundaries without speaking at all. And I'm smiling about this because I used to have a colleague that he would always joke in meetings that he knew if I liked or disliked something, not by my face, but just by a phrase that I used, right? In the intonation that I used it. And he would and I didn't realize I was doing it because I'm one of those people that I want everyone to give their opinions before I give my opinion. And at the end, I try to give my opinion as the leader because I don't want to sway. But even in doing that, you can sway. And so they could gauge whether I liked an idea or not by a simple word that I would use without really even thinking. And that's interesting. And depending on the tone that I use with that's interesting, they immediately go, oh, she didn't like that idea. Or they're like, oh, she really does find that interesting, which I always thought was funny because I'm thinking I'm being like incognito with how I felt about an idea. And they immediately would be able to clock how I felt about the idea by just that phrase, if that's interesting. And so one of the things that I've had to learn from that experience is to hold off saying anything at all, just complete listen mode, complete silence until they finish with the idea. And then I can express my opinion at the end. Because when someone was done talking and I'd go, that's interesting, they immediately go, she doesn't like that idea. So just a little fun fact for leaders about being cognitive of your nonverbal cues, because they are very powerful and they can give away your cards, so to speak. All right, let's take one more question. Let me see what the question. Oh, so how do I know when to make a decision or versus to consult the team? And then this person is just D. It just says D. All right, well, D. So this is a really interesting one. So what you're talking about is whether you make the final decision or you allow the team in a more democratic, collaborative way to make the decision. And I would say, D, it depends on the decision. So a couple of things, and this is a little bit of a sort of a funny vernacular. When George Bush was president, the son, not the father, he had this phrase that he'd say, I'm the decider, right? And so he turned that into an interesting turn of phrase. But it's a really important turn of phrase that he's used. And that is true. As the leader, you are the decider. You are the final decision point in a project, in a conversation. And so it is important to not only recognize that you are the final decision point, so you're constantly making the final decision, whether you think so or not. And so what you need to do in this situation is that, one, this is where your active listening skills come in handy and are very important. And there are times where you do need your team to debate. You do need to hear all the opposing views or the four views in order to make the final decision. And you can say that honestly to your team. I would really love to get your feedback on X, Y, and Z. I'd like to hear everyone's point of view. Whether you agree or disagree, I would like to hear your point of view. And at the end of the conversation, I will make my final decision. So notice what I did there, Dee. I've set the stage for this will be a collaborative experience, but it will not be at the end the team making the final decision. It will always be me making the final decision because that's my job. As a leader, your job is to make the final decision. That's one aspect of your job that you can't give to your team. You give them the ability to consult. You give them the ability to counsel you. You give them the ability to give you suggestions, to give you feedback, to give you a nice, interesting debate, right? And to have productive conflict, to really get into it. But at the end of the day, you make the final decision. So I guess the question here, whether it's like, when do I make the decision or when do I consult the team? You always make the decision, which is the answer to the question. But there are times, very importantly, where you need to get consensus from the team. They need to be able to hear from each other. They need to be able to understand where the decision is coming from, or you need to have counsel. You need to hear what people have to say. And it is okay to say, this is going to be a collaborative experience. I really do want to hear your feedback, because based on what you say in this meeting, I'm going to make a final decision. So notice, I'm not setting them up for saying they're going to make the final decision. I'm setting them up for the truth, which is at the end of the day, I'm going to make the final decision, but I want to hear what they have to say. I want to hear what it is that is on their mind, what they think about the subject, so that I can use all of that information to form the final decision for whatever it is. So Dee, I hope that helps in terms of decision making. And I want to say thank you for these questions. We have a few more, but we're running out of time. So I will say that's it for this week. We'll save some of these questions for next week. Have a wonderful rest of the week.